The teleological argument states that the intricate and precise design found on the galactic level of the universe, within our own very solar system, and even in the microscopic level of living cellular organisms, suggests the existence of an intelligent designer, God. Design theory is a scientific inference from biological data, not a deduction from religious authority. It relies on logic, reason, and rational thought. And those three items, logic, reason, and rational thought, is what will guide us in this subject. The teleological argument relies on the observation of order, purpose, and complexity in the natural world to show that intelligence and design is baked into the cake that makes up our universe and the natural world around us. The teleological argument has a long history dating back to ancient Greek philosophy, with notable proponents including Plato and Aristotle. The argument gained renewed interest during the Enlightenment era with the work of theologian William Paley. Paley's influential book, Natural Theology, published in 1802, presented the argument of design in a popular and accessible way. The watchmaker. In essence, the argument for the watchmaker is to suppose you are walking in the woods and your foot kicked up a stone. You wouldn't think much of it, but if your foot kicked up a watch, you'd have to wonder at the precision and complexity of the thing and realize that it must have had a maker. So then, given the precision and complexity of the universe and natural world around us, it only makes sense that there is a great designer outside of the universe that designed and created all we see around us. Again, God. Paley's book was published in 1802 and later received withering criticism from newly minted Darwinists. Of course, that was long before technology advanced, and we learned that an ordinary human cell contains several motorized components, maintains a DNA database equal to the size of a 750 megabyte hard drive, can transcribe the blueprints for various proteins, and then assemble those proteins to perform various functions, and can also split itself in half, all the while maintaining its library and passing along a copy to its newer half. The breathtaking complexity of a single human cell is, to this day, a complete mystery to our best scientific minds. So yeah, watchmaker indeed, or simply God. More recently, in 1967, Fred Hoyle, a British physicist, became the founding director of the Institute of Theoretical Astronomy at Cambridge University. Hoyle's work led him to study the properties of carbon and the factors that determined its abundance in the universe. Hoyle discovered that the energy level required for 3 helium nuclei to combine and form carbon was very finely tuned, and that a small change in this energy level would greatly affect the abundance of carbon in the universe. Hoyle famously compared the process to a pencil balanced on its tip, and that a small deviation in either direction would cause the process to fail. Hoyle later wrote, quote, "Some supercalculating intellect must have designed the properties of the carbon atom. Otherwise, the chance of my finding such an atom through the blind forces of nature would be utterly minuscule. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintellect has monkeyed with the physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The number one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." End quote. It was this same Hoyle that in 1981 stated, quote, "The chance that higher life forms might have emerged through the evolutionary process is comparable to the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein." End quote. Fred Hoyle was a committed atheist and struggled to reconcile his acknowledgement of intelligent design with its consequential implications. The designer, God. So what exactly is Darwinism, and what do Darwinists believe? If it's been a while, let's recap. Darwinism refers to the theory of evolution proposed by Charles Darwin in his book, On the Origin of Species. Darwinism suggests that all species of living organisms have descended from common ancestors through a process called natural selection. The theory states that individuals with advantageous traits in a species are more likely to survive and pass on those traits to their offspring, resulting in the evolution of species over time. Darwinists believe that natural selection, which is driven by random genetic mutations and environmental pressures, is the primary mechanism for this process, and is mindless, purposeless, spontaneous, and random. However, there are limitations to Darwinism that even Charles Darwin wrote about in his book. In Chapter 14, Darwin acknowledged that all his findings were based on species that were already reproducing. So, not really a treatise on the origin of life, after all. Think about that for a moment. In Chapter 6 of his book, Darwin wrote the following: "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." Somehow, this section of Darwin's book never seems to get quoted by today's Darwinists. Enter Michael Behe, a biochemist and professor at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, USA. In 1996, he wrote a book titled Darwin's Black Box: The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution. In it, Behe coined the phrase irreducible complexities and showed that some biological structures are too complex to have evolved gradually through natural selection, meaning that such complex organisms existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications. This ignited a firestorm worldwide in academia and among professional researchers. If this is true, according to Charles Darwin himself, the theory of evolution would absolutely break down. Thus began the withering smear campaign of Dr. Michael Behe. Darwin's theory insists that organisms evolved by way of numerous, successive, gradual, spontaneous, mindless, purposeless improvements. But machines are not made that way. They're assembled purposefully, mindfully, and follow a blueprint or design. Importantly, they are built with currently available or manufactured parts that are procured or manufactured for the purpose they serve in the machine. Natural selection would not, by way of its theory, and could not, in reality, create random individual parts for future use in future machines, mindlessly and with no purpose. That runs contrary to the theory and aligns itself with reality. If you were looking for the point where Darwinism began to disintegrate, it's right here. Irreducible complexity. At this point, I will note that in the year 1859, when Darwin's book was published, his microscope only allowed him to see living cells that looked like blobs of jelly. He had no real idea what they were or how they function. Today's neo-Darwinists, the modern Darwinists, have built a dividing wall in the scientific landscape, whereby they can pursue any lead at all in their scientific endeavors so long as the only place they can study or look to is on their side of the wall. Material naturalism, Darwinism. How very limiting. These otherwise very smart people are trying to do science wearing blinders with one arm tied behind their back and shackles on their feet. Consider it. With today's microscopes, we can see that inside the simplest of cells, there is machinery that performs various tasks. Yes, I did say machinery. One such machine is called the bacterial flagellum. We know now that it requires 30 different proteins that fit together with a specific purpose. Each of these proteins has a lengthy DNA string written with its own coded sequence or language. This is not random. This is a programming language of the cell. And language is not produced randomly, ever. By its very nature, selective mutation would not work to build machines. It's really that simple. Consider the bacterial flagellum, the motor and propeller that allows a cell to move about. You need about 30 separate parts to create the engine, drive system, and propeller. To build it, all of the parts need to be available at the same time and made in an individually specific way so that each part performs its function for the benefit of the overall engine. You simply cannot wait millions of years, or billions for that matter, for natural selection to build each part, because as every single Darwinist on the planet will tell you, natural selection is a mindless and purposeless endeavor. And yet, if it is mindless and purposeless and random, how can it create 30 specific parts over millions of years that one day will assemble themselves into a machine? The simple answer is, It cannot. Common sense says so. But then again, so does Charles Darwin himself. Recall the statement that is almost never quoted by any of his staunch followers. Quote, "If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down." Irreducible complexities, do they exist? Yep. The bacterial flagellum motor is the most popular example, but it's not the only one. It's a rotary engine that is coupled with a propeller that works just like a boat's outboard motor. It allows the cells to propel themselves in all sorts of directions. It's ingenious. It was designed to be that way, obviously. Stephen Mayer, with a PhD in philosophy of science from Cambridge University, stated this best when he said, quote, "Intermediate stages of individual parts confer no functional advantages. Therefore, there is nothing for natural selection to select on the way from the simple to the complex." End quote. Simply stated, these machines cannot be built by numerous successive modifications. The parts either fit together with a purpose and fire up the engine, or they don't. Meaning the entire 30-part flagellum is irreducibly complex, and therefore product of design. Again, logic, reason, and rational thought. So then, to apply a sophisticated logic statement, if it looks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, well, it's a duck. Intelligent design is a reality in science, no matter how badly some folks want to ignore it or try to shout it away. But wait, there's more. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. In 1953, Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel discovered DNA. Crick stated that the chemical constituents in DNA function like letters in a written language or symbols in a computer code. Just as English letters may convey a particular message depending on their arrangement, so do sequences of chemicals based along the spine of a DNA molecule. They convey precise instructions for building proteins. The arrangement of the chemical characters determines the function of the sequence as a whole. DNA has an amazingly complex information storage and processing system. Truly. Even Bill Gates wrote, "DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created." Wow. Now here's something you already know because, you're smart. Any computer program or code requires a programmer or a coder. Nature, especially the mindless, unguided, purposeless, random kind of nature, does not program advanced and complex programs. Which again begs the question, where is the programmer and how many programs did he create? You see, new forms of life require new information, which necessarily means new programming code for the DNA. Not possible with neo-Darwinism, but with a super intelligent designer, no problem at all. God. Crick later conceded in 1972 that the DNA code was so sophisticated that Darwinism could not account for it. So trying as hard as he could to avoid saying the word God, he instead theorized that aliens came to Earth and seeded it with the necessary single-cell organisms that could evolve. This is known as panspermia. Many Darwinists like the idea of panspermia because it allows them to hold tightly to their neo-Darwinism and have at the same time a solution for the origin of life problem, because it is a problem, that isn't, God. Now there's two problems with panspermia. First, where did the aliens come from and how did they originate? And second, how are we so sure that their delicate bacteria would survive in our hostile primordial soup millions and billions of years ago? It stretches credulity. Despite the vast amount of information contained in the DNA molecule, the cell is able to access and use this information with remarkable efficiency and accuracy. This is due to the complex and highly regulated system of enzymes and other molecules that work together to read and interpret the genetic code of the cell. The amount of DNA in a single cell can vary depending on the organism, the type of cell, and other factors. In humans, for example, most cells contain 2 copies of the genome, one inherited from each parent. And the total amount of DNA in a single cell is about 6 billion base pairs, 750 megabytes of data per cell. 6 billion! If we assume that each base pair corresponds to one letter, and that there are about 3 letters per word and 300 words per page, then we can estimate that the amount of information contained in a single cell's DNA would be roughly equivalent to 6 billion divided by 3 divided by 300, which is more than 66 million pages of text. How many encyclopedias would you say that makes? I have no idea. And again, how can there be 6 billion of anything in a tiny cell that you can't see? What an extraordinary design. As our modern philosopher Bill Clinton said, if you see a turtle on a fence post, it didn't get there by itself. But wait, there's still more. Even as early as the 1960s and 70s, many physicists had begun to consider the design hypothesis. This was about the same time that the Big Bang and the cosmological argument started to cause many to doubt their long-held views. They were impressed by the discovery that the laws and constants of physics are improbably finely tuned to make life possible. What many non-sciencey types don't realize is that the Earth is a terrestrial planet that supports life with its abundance of water and carbon. Its atmosphere, composed of just the right levels of oxygen and nitrogen, allows us to not just live but to thrive, while the spinning molten nickel core of the Earth creates the perfectly proportioned magnetosphere that shields us from the sun's harmful radiation. But at the same time, the right spectra of light can come through and allow for photosynthesis. In our solar system, the presence of Jupiter, the big gas giant planet, acts like a vacuum cleaner in the solar system, sucking up all the wayward comets and asteroids that could rain down on us. Finally, the Earth's location in the habitable zone around a stable, energetic star makes it a remarkably rare find. Again, as British astrophysicist Fred Hoyle put it, the fine-tuning of numerous physical parameters in the universe suggested that a super-intellect had monkeyed with physics for our benefit. The more you look at the many new discoveries in recent years, the easier it is to conclude that there exists a rational, reasonable, and logical basis to believe in the existence of God. At this point, Darwinism has proved everything it has to prove, which isn't much. It has shown some variations on the theme of different species, but no actual morphing from one species to all the rest, which begs another question. If there are so many problems with Darwinism, why do these institutions, professors, researchers, impose institution-wide anti-intellectualism and hang on to Darwinism so tightly? The big problem for Darwinism is that the questions that aren't answered never go away. As our technology gets even better and we can look deeper and closer into the world around us, these pointed questions, picking away at the very foundation of Darwinism, are only going to increase, get louder, and start to drown out the theory altogether. So it's important to look at the institutions that these folks come from. These institutions are all the universities and governmental bureaucracies around the world that maintain tight-fisted control on education, research grants. They employ all the professors and researchers. They provide prestige and esteem, as well as the opportunity to publish. Looking closely, it's easy to see the usual suspects: money, esteem or pride, and security. If any professor, researcher, or administrator dare breathe the word of intelligent design in a paper, a lecture, or even dare to reference another scientist who does, they will immediately lose their jobs, their grant money will dry up, and their opportunity to do science elsewhere will be lost due to the new black mark attached to their name. It really is that severe. These are people, most of whom have never held a job in the private sector, and they live in this certain kind of stale intellectual bubble and have an enormous financial and professional incentive for sticking with the party line so they don't have to get kicked out of that bubble. If you doubt this, be sure to watch Ben Stein's movie on YouTube, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. I'll put a link in the description below. Another reason so many in our culture are stuck in this disintegrating old belief system is that it has become, or replaced for many, a traditional religion. For many, it's a worldview, a belief system, a religion. A belief system that ultimately teaches that there's something known as relative truth, that you should live your life on your own terms, and that your morals are your truth. Do what you want. There's no moral judge. And a man is no different from a dog, a worm, or a cockroach. This is the result of Darwinism. Many Darwinists argue that organized theistic religion is bad or evil and responsible for all of our major wars. However, this statement is patently false. It's a lie. Hitler was a Darwinist who imposed unnatural selection on his society. The infirm, deceased, handicapped in Germany were exterminated to purify the Aryan race. Jews were considered as other. They were promoted to the culture as less than, and they were exterminated as well. If your religion teaches that a man is no different than a dog or a cockroach, you can see how easy that is to do. Stalin, a Darwinist, killed up to 60 million. Mao killed up to 40 million. When life has no value, Darwinist leaders have no problem killing their own. This is a recent historic fact. You can't shout this one down. It's just the truth. Good science doesn't demand sovereign-like loyalty. Science should not be a religion. It's a method for critical thought and discovery. New discoveries shape each field over time. That is the true evolution, the true science. And, like Anthony Flew, the longtime British atheist philosopher who finally came to accept the case for design, stated, "We must follow the evidence wherever it leads." Which, yet again, begs another question. What do you owe to an outdated and increasingly deficient scientific theory? The answer is nothing. At all. I'm making this video for you. No one else. Just you. Think about what you've been taught throughout your lifetime and why. And if that keeps you from finding the designer, finding God, then this system of education is impacting your life. The teleological argument for the existence of God is rational, it's reasonable, and it's logical. Combined with the cosmological argument and the moral argument, they build a very strong foundation for a belief in the existence of God. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to our channel and make sure you click on the notification bell to get all of our future videos. You can visit our blog and get more information on any subject we discuss. And you can also click on the next videos that you see presented on the right to go further into this series. Thanks so much for watching.